This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we return to MIT professor Noam Chomsky, world-renowned political dissident, linguist, and author. Last week, he spoke before over 800 people in the hall of the United Nations General Assembly, before ambassadors and the public alike, on the issue of Israel and Palestine. After his speech, I conducted a public interview with Professor Chomsky. What do you think is the single most important action the United States can take? And what about its role over the years? What is its interest here?
Well, one important action that the United States could take is to live up to its own laws. Of course, it would be nice if it lived up to international law, but maybe that's too much to ask. But live up to its own laws. And there are several. And here, incidentally, I have in mind advice to activists also, who I think ought to be organizing and educating in this direction. There are two crucial cases. One of them is what's called the Leahy Law. Patrick Leahy, Senator Leahy, introduced legislation called the Leahy Law, which bars sending weapons to any military units which are involved in consistent human rights violations. There isn't the slightest doubt that the Israeli army is involved in massive human rights violations, which means that all dispatch of U.S. arms to Israel is in violation of U.S. law. I think that's significant. The U.S. should be called upon by its own citizens and by others to adhere to U.S. law, which also happens to conform to international law in this case, as Amnesty International, for example, for years has been calling for an arms embargo against Israel for this reason. These are all steps that can be taken. The second is the tax-exempt status that is given to organizations in the United States which are directly involved in the occupation and in significant attacks on human and civil rights within Israel itself, like the Jewish National Fund. Take a look at its charter with the State of Israel, which commits it to acting for the benefit of people of Jewish race, religion, and origin within Israel. One of the consequences of that is that by a complex array of laws and administrative practices, the fund pretty much administers about 90% of the land of the country, with real consequences for who can live places. They get tax-exempt status also for their activities in the West Bank, which are strictly criminal. I think that's also straight in violation of U.S. law. Now, those are important things, and I think the U.S. should be pressured internationally and domestically to abandon its virtual unique role, unilateral role in blocking a political settlement for the past 40 years, ever since the first veto in January 1976. That should be a major issue in the media, in convocations like this, in the United Nations, in domestic politics, and government politics, and so on.
The role of the media, can you talk about that, and particularly in the United States? And do you think that the opinion in the United States, public opinion, is shifting on this issue?
Well, the role of the media are somewhat shifting from uniform support for virtually everything that Israel does to, and of course, silence about the U.S. role. That's not just in the case of Israel, that's innumerable other cases as well. But it's slowly shifting, but nevertheless, when about, say, Operation Protective Edge, one can read in news reporting in the New York Times, major journal, a criticism of Hamas's assault on Israel enduring protective edge. Hamas's assault on Israel, not exactly what happened, but that's what people are reading, and that's the way it's depicted. Israel is, over and over, it's pointed out, look, poor Israel is under attack. It has the right of self-defense. Everyone agrees to that. Actually, I agree too. Everyone has a right of self-defense. But that's not the question. The question is, do you have a right of self-defense by force, by violence? The answer is no for anyone, whether it's an individual or a state, unless you have exhausted peaceful means. If you won't even permit peaceful means, which is the case here, then you have no right of self-defense by violence. But try to find a word about that in the media. All you find is self-defense. When President Obama rarely says anything about what's happening, it's usually, if my daughters were being attacked by rockets, I would do anything to stop it. He's referring not to the hundreds of Palestinian children who are being killed and slaughtered, but to the children in the Israeli town of Sderot, which is under attack by Qassam missiles. And remember that Israel knows exactly how to stop those missiles, namely live up to a ceasefire for the first time. And then they would stop, as in the past, even when Israel didn't live up to a ceasefire. That framework, and of course the rest of the framework is the United States is an honest broker trying hard to bring the two recalcitrant sides together, doing its best in this noble endeavor, has nothing to do with the case. The U.S. is, as some of the U.S. negotiators have occasionally acknowledged, Israel's lawyer. If there were serious negotiations going on, they would be led by some neutral party, maybe Brazil, which has some international respect, and they would bring together the two sides. On the one side, Israel and the United States. On the other side, the Palestinians. Those would be possible realistic negotiations. But the chances of anyone in the media, either, I won't even say pointing it out, even thinking about it, is minuscule. The indoctrination is so deep that really elementary facts like these, and they are elementary, are almost incomprehensible. But to get back to the last point you mentioned, it's very important. Opinion in the United States is shifting. Not as fast as in most of the world, not as fast as in Europe. It's not reaching the point where you could get a vote in Congress, anything like the British Parliament a couple of days ago. But it is changing, mostly among younger people, and changing substantially. I'll just illustrate with personal experience. Amy has the same experience. Until pretty recently, when I gave talks on these topics, as I've been doing for 40 years, I literally had to have police protection, even at my own university, MIT. Police would insist on walking me back to my car because of threats they'd picked up. Meetings were broken up and so on. That's all gone. Just a couple of days ago, I had a talk on these topics at MIT. Meeting wasn't broken up, no police protection. Maybe 500 or 600 students were there, all enthusiastic, engaged, committed, concerned, wanting to do something about it. That's happening all over the country. All over the country. Palestinian solidarity is one of the biggest issues on campus. Enormous change in the last few years. That's the way things tend to change. It often starts with younger people. Gradually it gets to the rest of the population. Efforts of the kind I mentioned, say trying to get the United States government to live up to its own laws, those could be undertaken on a substantial scale, domestically and with support from international institutions, and that could lead to further changes. I think that for example, the two things that I mentioned would have a considerable appeal to much of the American public. Why should they be funding military units that are carrying out massive human rights violations. Why should they be permitting a tax exemption, meaning we pay for it? That's what a tax exemption means. Why should we be compelled to pay for violations of fundamental human rights in another country and even in occupied territories where it's criminal? I think that can appeal to the American population and can lead to the kinds of changes we've seen in other cases.
Final question before we open it up to each of you. Your thoughts on the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, sanctions movement?
Well, the BDS is a set of tactics, right? These are tactics that you employ when you think they're going to be effective and in ways that you think will be effective. Tactics are not principles. They're not actions that you undertake no matter what because you think they're right. Tactics are undertaken if you're serious because you think they're going to help the victims. That's how you adjust your tactics. Not because I think they're right in principle, but because I think they will be beneficial. That ought to be second nature to activists. Also, second nature should be a crucial distinction between proposing and advocating. I can propose now that we should all live in peace and love each other. I just proposed it. It's not a serious proposal. It becomes a serious proposal when it becomes advocacy. It is given, I sketch out a path for getting from here to there. Then it becomes serious. Otherwise, it's empty words. That's crucial and related to this. Well, when you take a look at the BDS movement, which is separate, incidentally, from BDS tactics, let me make that clear. So when the European Union issued its directive, or when that I mentioned, or when, say, the Gates Foundation withdraws investment in security operations that are being carried out not only in the occupied territories but elsewhere, that's very important. But that's not the BDS movement. That's BDS tactics, actually, BD tactics, boycott, divestment tactics. That's important. The BDS movement itself has been an impetus to these developments, and in many ways a positive one, but I think it has failed and should reflect on its so far unwillingness to face what are crucial questions for activists. What's going to help the victims and what's going to harm them? What is a proposal and what is real advocacy? You have to think that through, and it hasn't been sufficiently done. So if you take a look at the principles of the BDS movement, there are three. They vary slightly in wording, but basically three. One is actions should be directed against the occupation. That has been extremely successful in many ways, and it makes sense. It also helps educate the Western populations who are being appealed to participate. It's an opening to discuss, investigate, organize about the participation in the occupation. It's very successful. A second principle is that BDS actions should be continued until Israel allows the refugees to return. That has had no success, and to the extent that it's been tried, it's been negative. It just leads to a backlash. No basis has been laid for it among the population. It is simply interpreted as saying, oh, you want to destroy the state of Israel. We're not going to destroy a state. You cannot undertake actions which you think are principled when in the real world they are going to have a harmful effect on the victims. There's a third category having to do with civil rights within Israel, and there are things that could be done here. One of the ones I mentioned, in fact, the tax-free status for U.S. organizations that are engaged in civil rights and human rights violations. And remember, a tax exemption means I pay for it. That's what a tax exemption is. Well, that's an action that could be undertaken. Others that have been undertaken have had backlashes which are harmful. And I won't run through the record, but these are the kinds of questions that always have to be asked when you're involved in serious activisms, if you care about the victims. Not just feeling good, but caring about the victims. That's critically important.
MIT professor, world-renowned linguist, dissident Noam Chomsky, speaking last Tuesday in the hall of the United Nations General Assembly before 800 people in an event hosted by the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. We wish